It's coming.
Okay, oh, there we go. Excellent. Okay. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Matt Kudish and I'm the Executive Director of the National Alliance on Mental Illness of New York City. Tonight's discussion is on social media, screen time, and emotions during COVID-19. And if our preparation call from the other day is any indication, we're going to hear a really rich discussion about these issues and learn about how we can make the most of technology during these times. I'm going to start by going over some logistics for the presentation, and then I'll give you a very brief overview of NAMI New York City's programs and services that are relevant to this group and where you can find out more. And then I'll turn it over to our hosts who will be presenting today. I'm going to be keeping everyone muted, and with their video, we would ask that you turn your video off, except for our presenters. And if you have questions during the session, please put them in the chat box and we will address them at the end of the presentation. You can find the chat function at the bottom of your screen if you're on a computer, or in the menu in the bottom right corner of your screen if you are on a smartphone. If you are calling into the meeting today and don't have access to the chat, your options are unfortunately limited. But if you have any questions after the event, you should feel free to email our helpline at helpline@NAMI-NYC.org. Please note that this event is also being recorded and live streamed to Facebook. For those of you joining on Facebook, welcome. Please comment with any questions that you have, and the question will be relayed back to the participants. And if you enjoy the presentation and you'd like to share the recording after the event, you can do so by going to NAMI-NYC's Facebook page and clicking videos. If there are minor points of clarification, we'll try to address them in the chat. And again, if you have any follow-up questions after the presentation or need further support, please reach out to NAMI-NYC's helpline, and that number is 212-684-3264. And you can always email us at helpline@NAMI-NYC.org. So thank you so much for joining the discussion on social media, screen time, and emotions during COVID-19. This is an event in partnership between NAMI-NYC and Half the Story. Half the Story aims to empower the next generation's relationship with technology. And in addition to this event, we've also partnered with Half the Story on a guide for parents that addresses this very topic and includes information, resources, and exercises to help you figure out the best way to manage screen time during these challenging times. You'll hear more about Half the Story and where you can get the guide if you haven't already in just a minute. But before we do that, I just want to talk for a moment about NAMI New York City. For those of you who are not familiar with us, NAMI New York City helps people living with mental illness and their family members and their friends build better lives through education, support, and advocacy. All of our programs and services are available free of charge to anyone who needs them, including the helpline that I mentioned, which is available Monday through Friday from 10 to 6. And that number again is 212-684-3264. We also offer education classes, support groups, presentations that reduce stigma, and also put a human face on mental illness and much, much more. But because we're here today speaking specifically to parents and caregivers of young people, I just want to take a minute to point out a few of our programs that are specifically designed to target this demographic. We recognize in some cases that young people may behave in ways that may be concerning to parents and caregivers, although a formal mental health diagnosis may not be present or may not be diagnosed. From our perspective, in order to serve as wide an audience as possible, there need not necessarily be a formal diagnosis in the young person in your life. But some parents and caregivers may see signs or symptoms that might be more than typical adolescent behavior. And so some of the things we encourage folks to think about when they're wondering if a NAMI-NYC program might be a good fit is your child anxious? Is your teenager having challenges with participating in school? Is there excessive anger or fighting or cutting or substance abuse or social isolation, issues around eating? These are often symptoms of a mental health challenge. And if your child is showing any of these behaviors, our programs for parents and caregivers could be really helpful and supportive to you. So first, I'll let you know about a class we offer called Basics. It's a free 6-week class for parents and caregivers of children and teens who are 17 and under, who are showing signs of emotional and/or behavioral difficulties, or who have a mental health diagnosis. We also offer a support group called Parents of Children and Young Adults, which happens on the first and third Saturdays of every month at 1 in the afternoon. And we also have a parent match program, which offers free one-on-one support from one parent to another by telephone. We connect parents who are new to dealing with a child experiencing the challenges I mentioned earlier with a mentor parent who has similar situation, who has been there and gone through a variety of training that NAMI-NYC provides so that they can provide you with emotional support, listen to your story, share their experiences, and share ideas for how to take care of yourself and the young person in your life. For more information about these or any other NAMI-NYC programs and services, please visit naminyc.org or call our helpline at 212-684-3264. With that introduction, it is my great pleasure to turn the mic over to Larissa May, the founder of Half the Story.
Thank you so much, Matt. It's such an honor to be here. For those of you that aren't familiar with Half the Story, it's an organization that I started now almost 5 years ago out of my college dorm room as a result of my own experiences with social media and mental health. During a period of depression, I really started recognizing the role that social media was playing in my life. And I recognized that I wasn't the only one that was struggling with this tool that could be used in such a positive way. So I wanted to create a platform and then an organization to help inform young people on how they could build healthier and more positive relationships with technology, because it's here for the long run. It's actually our lifeline now during this time. And it's been so inspiring to see all the ways that it's bringing us together, including this. So it is a great honor to introduce some of the panelists that we have in the room tonight. They're some of the leading experts in this space. First, Dr. Tracy Dennis-Tiwary, who is our partner in this NAMI-NYC Parent Guide. She is a professor of psychology and neuroscience at the City University of New York and the founder of Wise Therapeutics, which is a digital therapeutics company that's translating cutting-edge science into digital tools for behavioral health. She's also one of the leading researchers and is constantly doing NIH-funded research on teen anxiety and risk for youth suicide and the impact of technology on social emotional health, which she'll share more about today. Additionally, we have joining us physician and filmmaker Dr. Delaney Ruston. She's the creator behind the award-winning film SCREENAGERS, and most recently SCREENAGERS Next Chapter, that looks at solutions around adolescent stress, anxiety, and the role that technology plays in youth and families' respective relationships and lives. With her, we have joining her daughter, Tessa Small, who is a high school senior, and they both live in Seattle, Washington. I would love for all of you to be able to watch this film as well. In addition to the parent guide that we've provided, I'll put a link in here so that at the end of the event, you can go, you can watch, and all of the proceeds from the screenings will be donated to NAMI-NYC and Half the Story. So I'm very grateful and excited for that. Today, to give you a sneak peek and preview of what you'll get out of this virtual event, first and foremost, we'll look at really the impact and the research that these two wonderful women have done in the past, in really 10 to 20 years of their careers, how it's affecting our emotional health, how technology is affecting our emotional health. Secondly, how we can increase our positive interactions with technology and really look at and investigate the costs and benefits of these platforms. And then lastly, we want to leave you with some tips and tricks that you can take home to your family as we're all trying to navigate this new normal. And that's something that we really want to set the stage with, that we are here to share what we've learned through research and through our experiences and what's working for us, but everyone's in a different situation. So these types of conversations can only bring us closer together. And so with that, one of the most fascinating things about this period is that before this period of isolation and quarantine, kids were already spending 6.5 hours a day on social media on their platforms. Within the span of their life, that's almost 5 years. And what I'm curious about, Dr. Tracy, is if you can share a bit about your work and studies on the emotional and social impacts of technology and how that's fitting into the modern world that we're living in COVID-19.
Here we go. Yes, thank you. And that was such a great introduction. I'm so pleased to be here to have this conversation. So, part of what I'm really interested in and the statistic of all the time that kids and we are spending on screens is a really important starting point. And where I've gone with that with some of my most recent research is to try to understand when we're on those screens and absorbed deeply in these experiences we're having, how does that affect our relationships? because of course, as we know now more than ever, relationships are such a huge component of our support systems, our mental health and our resilience. And so there are a couple studies that I've done with my colleagues and looking at this sort of idea of phubbing or technoference when screens are getting in the way of our relationships. And the first study I did on this topic was with parents and their children. And we know from decades of research that when parents are unavailable and unresponsive to children, not just once or twice, but really chronically over time, and this can sometimes happen in illness or when parents are depressed, we know that that compromises children's social emotional health and their resilience, their ability to really bounce back during emotional challenges. So my colleagues and I at Penn State and the City University of New York, we thought, maybe the way that we get absorbed, we parents get absorbed into our screens, not just once or twice, but really chronically over time, maybe our children are experiencing that as a form of asynchrony, as a form of deep disconnection. And if that's the case, could this be having a negative impact? So we designed a new experiment in which we had parents, we directed them to use their phones for just 2 minutes and really become absorbed and ignore their children. We told them to ignore their children who were in this study really toddlers, they were young children, for just 2 minutes. And then we were interested in what children's reactions to that were and also how they were able to bounce back during an emotional challenge right after this period and reconnect with their parents. And we found that that kids reacted quite strongly to parents becoming absorbed in their phones, as we may have all experienced. They became upset, and even some of the children after just a minute or two looked despondent. And then we saw, okay, now that we end this period, how do children handle a reunion with a parent and bouncing back from an emotional challenge that followed it? And we found that children were able to bounce back, but kids who parents reported were in families where there was a lot of family screen time, they were actually less able to bounce back during the emotional challenge. So what we took from this study was not that being on screens in front of our family is a bad thing per se, but what we think is that the more that we are on screens and have fewer opportunities to connect or reconnect with our kids, this could have some negative impacts over time in terms of our kids' resilience. And then we wanted in our second study to fast forward to adults. So we left the parent-child relationship and we had a study with adults in which they were problem solving together. And we were interested in how the phubbing technoference experience might impact not only problem solving, but how people feel and their ability to do cognitive tasks afterwards. So we had one participant and then we had a confederate who was a fake participant in the study. And as they were working on this difficult problem solving task, the confederate started getting phone messages and interrupting their problem solving got on their phone, and they essentially really disrupted this collaborative process by getting on their device. And then we looked at how participants afterwards, how their mood was and how they paid attention to different kinds of threatening or safe information around them. And what we found is that the experience of phubbing versus just a natural problem solving task actually not only made participants feel less happy, which makes sense, but it also affected how they processed information around them. So those participants who felt really saddened by the phubbing experience, they, in a cognitive assessment afterwards, preferentially paid attention to threatening information at the expense of the positive. And this bias, this threat bias, as we call it, we know is one of the drivers behind stress and anxiety. And that was work, by the way, that was spearheaded by a master's student in my lab, Kim Marinowski. So both of these studies show that it's not that devices are automatically bad, but there are costs to them in terms of the quality of our relationships and how we feel when these screens get in the way.
Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Tracy. I think one of the things that I'm most fascinated about during this time, I'm not someone who has children, but I think Delaney and Tessa, given your work and what really prompted you to create these films was so much so driven by your relationship together and the role that technology played in it. And so I'd love to hear, sort of bouncing off of Tracy, what you shared in the work that you're doing, what the emotional experiences are for parents right now, and how is that, relating to what's happening with our children, and what role is technology playing in that right now? Is it helping us or is it hurting us? I think we're seeing that it's connecting us with so many people, but so many of us are trying to figure out, where do we draw the line between healthy and unhealthy? And I'm just curious how you two have navigated it, and you too, especially Tessa, as who is a college senior or a high school senior, really in the midst of this limbo that we're all experiencing.
Yeah, well, after I made Screenagers, I was going around with that film about how do we help teens and kids find balance. And I was noticing lots of kids were dealing with stress, anxiety, depression. And I was looking at the research that where do they go to find information, because only 3 states are requiring their schools to teach about mental health. And if you look at the research, they often go to screens to find information. So that was brewing in my head and wondering. And then we actually had to move and things got really tricky in our lives. And then Tessa started to have a lot of depression symptoms, and I can let her speak to that. But I was surprised that even as a physician, I felt such at a loss of how to help with her emotional struggles. And, when it came to screen time, when she'd be on her screen, I would just be feeling, is this helping her? Is this hurting her? How do I help her to navigate that? And that really led to this film, Screenagers Next Chapter, which is all about helping. In the film, you'll see many stories in science about how do we help them find balance, what do we do as parents, and teens themselves, specific skills and solutions, which I can, mention as we move forward, but I just want to hear Tessa's thoughts to that.
Yeah, no, I have grown up with a filmmaker as a mom, so I've been very hyper aware of our relationship, and just having a camera involved has been a very unique experience, but also really interesting because it's allowed us to share it. And it's something that I wouldn't trade for like a more normal childhood or teenage years, especially. But with Screenagers Next Chapter, where it's primarily focused on the mental health of teens and my own pretty intense experience with depression, or just really finding my place in the world, I think I was most surprised going to Q&As and presenting and talking to people with the response about how much unknown there is about the screen time. And no matter how much I'm wanting to major in psychology and maybe become a therapist or work with adolescents, who knows, I was surprised about how much focus was around like screens and what time or age should kids get a phone, and questions I genuinely just felt inadequate to answer. And just be super conscious of when I am on my phone and why we're fighting about it, or what I'm feeling after a day of scrolling through TikTok versus a day of trying to be productive and kind of getting my phone taken. Just all of these situations have been really interesting to obviously experience firsthand, but also to really annotate and analyze and just think through in a different way than a lot of my peers may be. So I'm thankful to be able to speak on it, but also just to be able to be aware of it and really think deeply with so much support of what this is, how this is impacting us, what this is going to become.
I think that's a really great point. And I think first and foremost, based on a couple of the things that I've seen in the chat, is that this is a really difficult thing to navigate. And it isn't black or white. It's very gray when it comes to tech-life balance, depending on what your situation is. A lot of parents are especially trying to manage so many different roles. And so I'm curious, because one of the things that we allude to in the guide, and Dr. Delaney, we've talked a lot about this, as well as Dr. Tracy, is we think about our relationship to technology very similarly to our relationships with nutrition and food and other things. And I'd love to talk a little bit about both of your optimistic perspectives on how we can actually increase our positive interactions with technology while also considering the costs and benefits. And with saying that, everyone that's here is already moving in the right direction because you're here in this conversation, even though it might be hard to navigate. But I'd love to hear it from the two experts, because this has been very eye-opening to me on my own digital wellness journey.
Yeah, when I think about that question, I think a lot about the fact that we were all
I'll start,
blindsided
and
in
then,
a way. Oh, sorry. Did that
no,
freeze?
go ahead.
Okay. I feel that we're often blindsided. We were blindsided by the mobile revolution in a lot of ways. So we all felt very unprepared to navigate the complexities. And so what we have to take a step back for ourselves and for our kids is to think about how to be good digital citizens and what that means. And when you're a good citizen, it means that you're thinking about the health of your community and the health of yourself. And so I see there being a few steps that we can start to think about to start figuring out for our, like what are the guidelines from science, which are still evolving, by the way. We scientists need to keep doing work to give those guidelines. But what is the balance that we all need to strike that works for us? And so one thing that we all can educate ourselves and our kids around is the fact that technology does suck us in ways that are often unconscious, and it can be very habit forming. And kids sometimes and sometimes not are aware of this. So the first step we can take is start to understand how to make good choices around the fact that we have this technology around us that can create compulsions or draw us in ways that we don't necessarily want to be. The second thing is to know that screen times can be amazing. Right now, we're connecting together, we're sharing information. We cannot ever underestimate the power of that, especially during a crisis like COVID. But at the same time, screen time is an opportunity cost for other kinds of interactions. It's an opportunity cost in terms of learning certain things, of expressing ourselves creatively and connecting face-to-face with people. So it's about, in our own lives and in those of our children, having the dialogue around how can we find, how do we optimize the good that we find in using screens and minimize those more negative. And I think the junk food metaphor is very helpful with this, because if we think about, and we can see for ourselves, what are the kinds of screen use that make us feel good? Is it endlessly scrolling through social media? Or is it when I get onto Ableton and compose a new piece of music or whatever it is? And so as we start to understand what is healthy screen use for our own personal lives and those of our children, and what is junky that leaves us feeling depleted, low energy, and not fulfilled and purpose-driven, then we can again start to have those dialogues with our kids. And it's important not to just lecture to them, but to really, if age appropriate, have a dialogue about making those healthy choices so they can build skills as well.
The work that I've been doing is so much about how we talk with teens. They're in a society right now where they are getting bombarded constantly with messages like social media is destroying a generation. Teens and kids are wonderful. We're not destroying them. But I know that I was so often being negative about social media, for example, with Tessa. And so then when it came to making some rules around helping her to have it put away at times, she would not engage at all. So I needed to learn to validate. And one of the things that she really enjoyed, and you can speak more about that, were YouTubers. At times she would just go on to get an inspiration. And to me, I was scared, what is it that they're doing? But once I could really start to validate, like I could see how that would be helpful, we were able to have better conversations. So it's one of the big things I say, because often the parents who are coming to hear talks like this, right, we are worried, and it's from a loving way, but it can be translated into a scare tactic, which as a physician, I could say doesn't really work, as opposed to a share tactic where we're more calm and trying to talk about these things in a way that they're not so defensive.
Yeah, for sure. This time is insane, as we all know. I think Tracy mentioned this on our discussion on how much guilt has become a part of screen time right now. The numbers, at least for me personally, and the people I know close to me, everyone has skyrocketed in their own way. Maybe that's from 30 minutes to 2 hours, or from more likely 3 hours a day to 18. These are exaggerations, but it might feel that way. And just to take away that guilt off everyone, I'm a nanny too, which I might be bringing in some references in during the day, with a 4-year-old girl who just wants to be on the screens all day. And the minute I let her be happy, which I feel is also important, I get extreme guilt, and I'm like, why are they paying me to just let the screen be a babysitter? But just to take away that guilt first and foremost, and talking about it here that it's not a judgmental thing. If you're having like harder situations than someone else, that doesn't make you a worse parent or a worse kid. It's just such an intense time that, like, as nice as we can be to ourselves and each other, that's the most important. But also for me, I also am trying to validate myself, because as a senior in high school, being with friends and being connected to people is like the primary goal of second semester senior year, which is notorious for being just with other people, not notorious, but well known if you were ever a senior. At least that's how I've envisioned it. And now to have that taken away has made screens that much more important. So I'm obviously learning online, but I'm also connecting online, and having those having that line just super blurred makes it super hard, because I want to reach out, and anytime a friend does text me or I do have a planned FaceTime, I will like latch onto that and really, really enjoy the time I can get with other people, because I frankly am feeling really lonely right now, even with screen time. So any distraction, like TikTok has become just such a distraction, or scrolling through mindless videos, and Netflix is such a good coping mechanism for a distraction. But in the end, it doesn't make me feel much better if I'm more honest with myself. But long story short, there's just so much pressure and reason to be or make us feel like bad people because this is happening right now.
This, I have younger children, 8 and 11, and I see in the chat a little bit of discussion about distance learning. I'm there with you. It's really challenging. And something you said, Tessa, about how incredibly important it is to be able to connect with friends via technology, our only way to do that right now. I see that with my 11-year-old son, and some of you may be having this experience. They're on Zooms all day in some form, and then they want to connect with their friends. My son likes Minecraft, and he FaceTimes while he plays Minecraft. And I've really struggled with figuring out, well, how long should I let him be on Minecraft? Is it, how healthy versus junky is this for him? And what I've started to try to figure out, but really have dialogue with him about is, well, what is it in this experience that's fulfilled? Like, what is it that you're getting out of this that makes you feel connected? Is it playing the game, or is it really doing the FaceTime? Is it what you're talking about? So, it's going to be different for every kid, but what I've tried to do is set limits around how long he can connect with friends, but understanding that this is his way of doing that, and finding the ways that he can do that don't deplete him and make his eyes go cross because he's on screen so much. And then also make sure that he's breaking that up in healthy ways, as I do, as we all do as adults, and getting outside and doing other activities. So it's this constant balance. But as Tessa said, to be in a guilty place about it is not going to help us. It will block us from being able to have those open dialogues.
Absolutely. And I think too, and one of the things we also talk about a lot in the guide is intention setting. A lot of the conversations around screens, particularly that I hear with parents or even in schools, it's about, don't do this, don't be on this. And kids naturally don't respond to that. And so one of the things that's also worked really well is kind of teaching your child to actually have an intention and ask that question of themselves of why they're going on their phones, and they might not have that, they might not know that out of the gate, but it will ultimately create a bigger conversation for you to think about, how do we get to the root of what they're seeking? Tessa, I heard you say something really interesting about how, as a senior, you're looking for this form of validation because everything is in limbo right now. And I think that that's an important dialogue for you too, as a parent, to get to the root of, because your kids aren't going on their screens just to go on them. They have needs that they're probably trying to fill a void with right now through the screen, which has been, proven to be a coping mechanism for many kids, because it's a lot easier to disengage than it is to engage with real life and these emotions that we're all experiencing. And so we also have sort of a journal or guide that you can do collectively as a family to help with reinforcing that behavior, because of course, one webinar or one conversation is not going to do it. Real habits have to happen daily, and that has to be through repetition. And with parental buy-in, and setting that for the full family and making it sort of a family affair, the results that you will see over time, I'm sure, will be much greater in navigating this.
And
you know,
I'm
the
seeing
thing-
some great comments coming in, just wonderful comments from everyone. And we adults do lead by example, as someone was just noting. And I think that as we are struggling with our own screen time, I know that Zoom fatigue is real for me, and I've embraced phone calls like never before. And I'm learning to take breaks and find activity in different ways. And we shouldn't do that privately. We should really do that with our kids and our families, and try to. And again, it's a collaborative process of digital citizenship, and how to find out, okay, what, maybe it's hours of screen, or maybe it's what we're doing on screens. But again, we have to also lead by example. And I really took that from a chat comment as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with that being said, we have a couple of questions that individuals have that I'd love to answer at the tail end of this conversation. But I'd love for everyone, specifically our speakers, and if you feel compelled to in the chat, I'd love for us to share what's worked for us during this time, because what works for you, Dr. Tracy, might not work for me, vice versa. And I'd love, for all of us to be able to share 1 or 2 tangible tips that our audience members can take away, many of which are also in the guide, because all perspectives are welcome right now. So what's been working for you guys? Let's start with Dr. Delaney and Tessa.
I think it's really interesting. It's great to be talking with New York NAMI right now, because as many of you might have remembered, New York Times came out with an article that said, the debates over screen time has won. The reality is that has never been the debate. I think that the debate is more what my husband and I were debating when I was even before thinking about creating SCREENAGERS. And he would often say to me, Delaney, when it comes to screen time, I think our kids just need to figure it out by themselves. They need to learn on their own. And I kept kind of looking around, kind of going, I don't know. This is a really big pull. This was 9 years ago. And I said, hon, I think we're setting them up for failure. And frankly, I can't bear it, the hours and hours that they would naturally incline to it. I needed to parent with some integrity. And one of the big things that has always been a rule in our home are screens out of the bedroom at night. I'm talking with a lot of teens right now who are staying up till 1 or 2 in the morning and getting up really late. And I ask a lot of them, do you need help? Like having the phone out or the devices out? And a lot of them are saying, yeah, frankly, I do. So it's even in this pandemic, this awful time, that while yes, that we're going to be a lot more lenient about time, and I'll talk about some other tips, the biggest one I'm still out there advocating is for helping our youth get healthy sleep time. And that means devices out of the bedroom. We know from data, even before COVID, that almost 40% of teens will self-report that when devices are in their room, they will wake up at least once to check them. More importantly, we know they're up very late. So in terms of what we can particularly do right now around emotional health and mental well-being, that's one of them. And it was in SCREENAGERS next chapter, there's a little bit around the science of sleep, as well as lots of other tips, because it's easier said than done. I get it. If you have a teen and you haven't had that be then there's lots of ways that I have in coming forward with that, which I write about in a weekly blog, Tech Talk Tuesdays. So it's lots to cover, and I just wanted to bring up one thing. And Tessa is still, and Chase is here from college. Both of them are still doing that now. He came home, and at first he had his devices, his phone in his room, and then he literally ordered, because our alarm clock down there was broken, he ordered another alarm clock.
I agree. It's so hard to be on this end of the conversation where all I want to do is be on my phone until 2 a.m. And I did that last night and I slept until 12. But on the most part, and that was also because it was like my weekly Zoom with a friend, and that just went very long. And I told my mom I'd bring it back up when it was over, but instead I fell asleep. And then I woke up and I was on it, and I was just like, wow, feeling very groggy and weird that my day started at 12:30 or whenever. So with that, I think curiosity, and it's so hard because I just want to speak for all the kids and be like, we are fine, don't come at us. But I also have my mom's side kind of instilled in me where it's like, come at them with curiosity. But I'm going to turn to that for this conversation, where when my mom asks me what I'm doing on my phone, I feel very judged or stabbed. And I'm like, wow. Or she'll my very biggest pet peeve is when she stands over my shoulder and starts reading my text or saying,
I don't do that.
okay, well, you're standing over my shoulder and being like, what are you doing? And that will be my biggest, turn off, like, please back away. I need space. This is my time. And so I think a better approach that we've kind of sort of been working on is when she's genuinely curious, like, oh, what are the videos that you're watching? Like, can I watch it with you? I won't judge. I've been a teenager too. This is kind of interesting. Or complimenting, like, wow, that seems like a really fun way to see like trends on TikTok. Like, those are funny videos. And that just opens up to have a little more level conversation of where it's not against me, but instead with me. And it's more fun.
Those are great. And I'm so happy to have you on this conversation, Tessa. You just add this incredibly important perspective. Thank you again for being with us. I agree with all of that. I especially agree with the sleep issue as well. With the tips that have worked for me, I have a lot of parenting fails, but one thing that I've really tried to do for myself and for my family and my kids who are a little skewing younger is, my belief is a life well lived is really about social connection, loving and being loved, and purpose in life. And if we have something in both of those bins, it really helps move us through life. And so every day, and again, I don't always succeed at this greatly, but every day I try to find for myself and for my children, help them find an off-screen activity that gives them a sense of purpose, that gives them a sense of social connection. And maybe that's playing badminton on the lawn. Maybe that's finding some herbs in the garden. I'm in the country right now, so you can see where my mind is going. Maybe that's writing something or creating a game together. But I just try to find some opportunity, even in these very difficult days, for us to do that off screen and to find kind of calibrate our positive experiences that way.
Absolutely.
This is counterintuitive, but the biggest inspiration for what I have been spending my time off screens is from screens. And with that, there are really fun TikTok trends that are like a cooking experiment, or I recently cleaned out my closet to sell online because that's something my friends have been doing on an app called Depop. So that took a lot of time and effort. I set up a whole studio in my room. So having the phone as a behavioral activation to something off screen can be a good transition point where it's not as.
And shouldn't that be how it's designed?
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that what it's
Yeah.
for?
Like, go do it.
The best world.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think all those tips are really fantastic. And also one thing that has worked really well for me, I think first and foremost, someone made a suggestion in here, and this is something that I would suggest for parents as well. I think so many of us are trying to figure out what do schedules look like during this time when we're all sitting in the same room. And something that helps is even thinking about your screen time schedule and sort of what you're doing on your phone during these respective hours, and building in time for real social connection rather than having all these worlds blur together. I know for me, it's very challenging to have work and then family and then all of this stuff in one place. So I try to really designate that time accordingly and even block it out on my calendar. But also another thing that really helps is being able to sort of feel free from your screens. And there are two things that I've been doing that work really well is on the weekends, setting a vacation email on my email, just so that if people email me on the weekends that I'm clearly setting that and that they know they're not going to hear back from me. Because right now I think the lines between work and play are just, completely blurred. But also there's another really fantastic tip, and it's called brick mode. And basically it's the ability to set in a way a message for your texts on your phone. And I will put that in here because that's something that I think a lot of parents, definitely probably struggle with this. Like, we all want to respond to everyone. There's a lot of anxiety around that, especially with connections being digital. And so it's a nice little nudge to let people know that you're enjoying the real world and you'll get back to them on Sunday. So I'll definitely share that. But I'd love to, perhaps answer 1 or 2 questions from the group, and then we can send everyone off on their way. I do see there are a lot of great things that have been working for individuals in the group. And I'm wondering, Dr. Tracy and Dr. Delaney, I think there's a lot of questions around how do you like set guidelines for a family when your children in different circumstances just based on their own mental health situations? Do you have any advice around that?
In terms of them being different ages and trying to right now have different hours in the home. Well, I think I'm glad you're asking. I will give some, but I want to say that this work that I've been doing made me realize how this takes a village. So while I'm going to give some ideas here, what I learned in making these films is that parenting is so private. And given that we're in a tech revolution, we need to be much more helping each other. And when I made mental health documentaries, it was hard to get people to come forward and be talking, of course, but parenting is surprisingly private. So I'm glad you're bringing this up, but what I encourage everyone to do is to be sharing more with their friends and their circles around what they're doing to navigate with their kids, for example, kids of different ages. I think what I always work on related to finding some screen limits in terms of what they're doing on screens and off screens is about talking first and foremost about family values. So that, for example, maybe the younger kid now is playing violent video games in a way that you thought that was not going to happen in your home, or definitely not as much. And right now it's the way they're connecting and you just decided that's how it's going to be. Then a meal, when your guys are together talking, you talk about your values. It's not really my value that playing violent video games is like a game. Let's talk about some events in history where nonviolence made change. How did the civil rights movement happen? So you're still sharing values. And as a parent, my value is that you're getting some time to not just consume, because if you look at the data, only 3% of time on screens is actually content creation. So those companies, they want you to watch what they're making, their games, their TV shows, their everything. But I want you to develop that ability to use your creative mind and be doing those things. So how are we going to set up some time for you to do that, separate from your brother or sister? So it's these kind of conversations about values that really helps, and to value their input so that they have input into it. And it might be one little thing that you pick and you guys work on. And it's all about, as a doctor, I can tell you behavior change is about one small goal. See how that goes, name it well. Don't just say, oh, I'm going to try to get better. You got to name one and work on it. As parents as well, too. And I'm glad that Tracy had mentioned that too, that when we're vulnerable, we're actually gain much better when we're doing this together.
And Tessa, did you want to say something? I was just going to jump in.
No, go for it.
And Delaney, I love what you were saying about the consumer versus creator mode, because I think that's a real guideline for us about how to think about junk versus healthy screen consumption. It's not that, listen, we all want to binge watch, streaming sometimes, but it is relatively junk food. And so as we have these conversations, as you were describing with our kids, let's forget for a minute that it's screen time. How would we have conversations with them about finding the right balance of food, the right balance of activities? It feels a little magical and overwhelming because it is screen time and it's so fraught. But I think that whatever parenting strategies we have, talking with our kids about other aspects of their life, we can apply here. And on a mental health note, I think a lot and study anxiety. One thing I did want to mention as we watch our kids and they have different habits around screen use is, devices and screen time are in some ways the ultimate escape machine. escaping from every unpleasant feeling we have, whether that's anxiety or boredom, distress. And what happens when we escape those unpleasant feelings too much is it's actually the quickest way to accelerate and amplify experiences like anxiety, because we lose opportunities to actually be with that unpleasant feeling and learn to cope with it. So as we see our patterns, our own patterns, and how our kids are using devices and screens, if we see that they're going into this escape mode instead of a creator mode, that's a red flag for us. And we can start to understand what emotions are they trying to manage and work through and or avoid, and how we can help them in other ways of doing that.
Tracy, I'm glad you brought that up, because obviously everyone wants to know, is mental health problems, is social media causing this huge epidemic of mental health problems? And when we look at screen time in general, that it's complicated. And one of the things that it's doing that can be a problem is there can be social cruelty, but it's much less those numbers, although it's insidious of feeling left out, and it is an issue. It's also displacing time, which is crucial. Sleep and time with other people that we know unquestionably is important for key mental health. And thirdly, and most importantly, it's the go-to with hard emotions, as you were saying, Tracy. So I just wanted to reiterate that, because as we try to use the scare tactic of screen time is causing a mental health epidemic, we're losing conversations with our kids that are going to be productive. And that's all my work is about. It's at me learning, because I'm constantly learning from my teens I'm doing it wrong, and then I talk with people and try to do better, is how do we engage them using communication science in a way that they're going to be the next generation and also be learning how to do this. Because final point is, when we say we didn't grow up with this, it's no guarantee that they're growing up with it. They're going to be able to parent it and be able to handle the emotions it takes to have boundaries or to have conversations about pornography or have all sorts of things. It's us doing this work now, getting messy and failing and trying again and working as a village, that's going to make me feel happy that they're going to say, I grew up with this, I got some good parenting around it, and I'm ready to do the work, because frankly, it's a price we pay for this incredible tool of the tech revolution that is unbelievable that we are living with. It's incredible what we can do with our technology now.
I agree so much with that. And it's funny, I think when we stop laying the blame at the foot of social media and technology for all of the ills of our kids and of society, it just takes a huge load off too. And I wrote an opinion piece a year or so back about teens and screens, and I argued that we can't just blame it all on social media. And really it's, sometimes it could be a cause, but a lot of times it's a symptom. A lot of times it's an accelerant or an amplifier. And I was so touched to receive an email from a teen who said that they had been studying in one of their classes about the impact of social media on well-being. And she said, it's really unclear what the answer is, which was true. And she said, then I read your opinion article, and it was such a load off my peers and my shoulder to understand that some adult out there is not just blaming everything on our digital lives, because frankly, this is a central part of our lives and of my peers, and to just demonize it is really losing a lot of opportunity to find the right solutions for these much larger problems. So I think I just want to underscore what you were saying.
Well, go ahead, Tessa.
Yeah, no, it's just like a very random, distinct tip that I've been trying to use more and more as I just have what I call just like mindless scrolling, which I think has become my biggest use of my phone recently, just as a distraction and just as a relaxation, is to put on timers, whether that be on my phone or like a cool digital clock, especially with the 4-year-old that I've been hanging out with. She loves this like very cool looking digital alarm clock that goes off whenever I do it. She gets more interested by this like really weird looking clock than, obviously not every time, but then the game. And as long as we set it up from the beginning, like you're gonna have 5 minutes to play Subway Surfers on my phone, and then we gotta play with the cool clock because it will go off, that gets her off. But also just on TikTok and Instagram and literally any app that has mindless scrolling, they've designed it to take away the time. So you literally cannot see what time it is. And it's just become more and more interesting for me to realize what classes or what apps have that. So I think it's important to be aware of the time because it's just an endless to be. So timer that brings me back into reality, even if it's set for 2 hours, it really helps me, or 10 minutes. Yes, 10 minutes. It helps me stay in the real world or a different world.
Timers is so smart, and for younger children too, which I noticed some comments are about, because these technologies and these interfaces are actually designed to be like a casino. And if you've ever read about how they design casinos, which keep people gambling, is there's no 90-degree angles. Everything is a curve. You keep going and you lose track of time and you get absorbed in the experience. So these apps are designed to do that. And so something as elegant and simple as a timer is hugely effective, and we can find different versions of that, especially for our younger kids. So great tip.
Yes, absolutely. And I think with that, we're almost at the conclusion. So I want to thank our guests, and then I'll hand it over to Matt. And if anyone wants to, what I'll do at the end of the conversation is I'll link to SCREENAGERS. I'll also link to the guide that we created. And also to something to keep in mind is that if you're interested in this conversation, Half the Story, which we haven't publicly announced this yet, but we're working on a special global initiative with the National Day of Unplugging that will be coming out soon. So feel free to be in touch, and please share these resources, and even more so, just start the conversation. That's why we create these opportunities here, and that's why we do the work that we do, because it really starts there. And all of you have taken the first step by being here today. So thank you so much, Dr. Delaney, Dr. Tracy, and Tessa. And now I'll hand it back over to Matt.
Thank you, Lars.
Thanks so much, Lars. And thank you everybody for such a really rich conversation. I feel like we could go on for many more hours beyond this. It feels as if we touched on a lot of important aspects of this issue, but that it's so big and so complicated, and it really requires a lot of conversation with the parent and the child to figure out how to come to some agreement around how we're going to handle this technology. I want to thank Dr. Delaney. I want to thank Dr. Tracy. A huge thanks to Tessa for sharing your perspective on this. I agree, Dr. Tracy, that hearing from a teenager in the context of this conversation is critically important. So thank you so much to each of you. A huge shout out and thanks to Lars. Please watch SCREENAGERS next chapter. Please check out halfthestoryproject.com and download the guide. And please visit NAMI-NYC.org, where you can learn about more of the free programs and services that we provide. Thanks everybody for joining us tonight, and have a great evening.